Hi there, I'm Persephone. I'm here to help Soleil give her presentation about the war on drugs. As perhaps many of you know, the war on drugs began in June 1971 when the US President Richard Nixon declared drug abuse to be public enemy number one. The war on drugs, however, wasn't a very big deal till the presidency of Ronald Reagan, which began in the 80s, or around 1981. His wife Nancy created a campaign that told school children to just say no to drugs, in an effort to lower drug abuse around children. As word about the war on drugs spread, public nervousness increased as the crack epidemic arose in the early 1980s. This led to the US Congress passing the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. This act enabled Congress to set mandatory minimum prison sentences for being in possession of certain drugs. For example, having 5 grams of powder cocaine in one's possession could get a person an automatic 5-year sentence. A lot of these drug offenders were nonviolent African Americans, and this mandatory minimum made incarcerations of them disproportionate to that of white majorities. Today, some cities are trying to lower this rate by treating drug addiction as a disease instead of a crime. They're launching campaigns that decriminalize possession of controlled substances, building safe injection centers, and creating easier access to clean syringes. This doesn't mean that doing drugs is good, however. It's just a means for reducing the harm done to people, lowering the risk of HIV from sharing needles, personnel in safe injection facilities being there to help those who want to be rehabilitated, or providing aid to people at the first sign of overdose. Decriminalizing drugs in certain areas brings down the criminality rate. Here's a video that explains this statement.
Prohibitions do not eliminate the market for illicit goods. Prohibitions do, however, increase violence and increase the risk of overdose. The recent history of the United States includes 2 major periods of prohibition: federal alcohol prohibition from 1920 to 1933, and the current war on drugs, which began in 1971. During both of these periods, we witnessed increases in the homicide death rate that correspond to enforcement of these prohibitions. Why do prohibitions lead to violence? First, we have to recognize that prohibiting the production or consumption of a substance does not eliminate its use. Almost half of high school seniors report using an illegal substance in their life. Prohibition merely drives the market for drugs underground. Producers operate in a black market, and consumers conceal their behavior. Economics predicts a variety of adverse effects of black markets. The evidence confirms these effects. In a black market, when disputes arise over sales territory, over product quality, over correct change, the legal system is not available. Drug producers and consumers must resolve their own disputes and may rely on violence to do so. The lack of legal, visible options to impugn the reputation of bad faith drug dealers typically leads to lower quality and, importantly, less predictable quality drugs, increasing the risk of poisoning and of overdose. Further, law enforcement expends resources to enforce prohibitions. Prison space used to house drug dealers and users is space not available for other, more serious criminals. One estimate suggests that homicide rates are 25 to 75% higher than they would be in the absence of drug prohibition. If your goal is to reduce the consumption of marijuana, cocaine, meth, or heroin, there are other policy choices available. A policy regime such as the one we have with tobacco, with high tax rates, minimum smoking ages, and extensive education campaign could keep the consumption of these drugs relatively low while avoiding the violence and quality issues associated with the black market. It might seem counterintuitive that prohibitions are not the most effective way to reduce the consumption of a good, but economics points out that prohibitions generate black markets, and black markets lead to other adverse effects.
But Ms. Persephone, what about the legalization of marijuana in certain states? Well, Melody, this is because of the medicinal aspect of the plant. It's not susceptible to abuse, and was even removed from DARE's list of gateway drugs. Basically, it's being legalized because its pros overshadow its cons. Well, then that means that the government should reconsider its laws around drugs and maybe apply limits to them, kinda like how they have an age minimum for cigarettes? A system like that could be in place in the future, yes. At least making some drugs be controlled and preventing its widespread use could help with the drug problems in this nation today. Then how does this all relate to the American dream? The American dream is often thought about as the ability to become rich when someone comes to the United States, but this is rarely the case. The way that this war on drugs relates to the American dream is that it's meant to keep people safe from drug crimes, and therefore making America safe for everyone. Now, let's see what we've all learned from this lesson with a Kahoot!